Muscle cells. Muscle tissue has several functional characteristics that are unique to these cells. They have contractibility, which is a strong pulling force as they contract, excitability, an electrical impulse that travels along the cell's plasma membrane and stimulates them to contract. This can be caused by a variety of factors, like a nerve signal. Extensibility, meaning these cells can be stretched. And elasticity, which means these cells have the ability to recoil and resume original position. There are 3 different types of tissue in the body: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. At first glance, these cells look very similar to each other, but there are some characteristics that set them apart. Each cell type is found in a different area of the human body, depending on the cell's function. The presence or absence of microscopic striping, called striations, and whether these cells are controlled voluntarily or involuntarily are 2 other identifying features. Voluntary versus involuntary refers to innervations of the muscle tissue. Those that are voluntary are innervated by voluntary motor nerves, which are subjected to conscious control by an individual. Involuntarily, on the other hand, are innervated by involuntary portions of the nerves that cannot be controlled consciously. Skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle tissue is made up of cells called fibers. They are referred to as fibers because they are elongated. This is also the name used for cells in the smooth muscle, but not for cells in the cardiac muscle. A group of fibers stick together and is called a fascicle. The fascicle is then held together by the perimysium, a fibrous connective tissue. This binding of fibrous connective tissue is what holds these fibers together in a parallel alignment and produces the force needed for contraction. Throughout the fascicle, there are also many visible nuclei, that is referred to as multinucleated. Skeletal muscle makes up about 40% of a person's body weight and is responsible for the movement of skeleton, as the name implies. Striations are visible on these muscle cells, and their contraction is subject to voluntary control. The striations extend transversely across these muscle cells when viewed microscopically and as seen here. Cardiac muscle. Here is a model of the cardiac muscle tissue. The cardiac muscle tissue also has visible striations when viewed microscopically. Cells on this tissue are connected by intergalactic discs that support the synchronized contraction of the cardiac tissue. These dark spots that can be seen at the end of the pointer are the nuclei of these cells. There are also multiple nuclei visible throughout this muscle type, but not as many as those seen in the skeletal tissue. This tissue has many gap junctions that allow the passing of ions through the cell. Cardiac tissue composes the wall of the heart, as the name implies, cardiac. These cells are controlled involuntarily and are called visceral muscle because they occur in the visceral organ. Moving on to the smooth muscle. There are visible spindle-shaped cells or fibers. However, these muscle cells do not have any visible striations. This unique feature sets it apart from the other two muscle cells. These cells also have much less actin and myosin than skeletal muscle cells. The contractions produced by these cells are specialized for slower movement as well. Smooth muscle cells do not require constant nervous input to contract. They are controlled involuntarily and also are called visceral muscle. Smooth muscle tissue can actually undergo spontaneous contraction, and their myofibers are less organized than those fibers found in the skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle cells are also found in the walls of hollow organs and are uninucleated. In conclusion, there are several ways of differentiating between these three muscle cells. Skeletal and cardiac muscle cells have visible striations. Smooth muscle doesn't. Skeletal and cardiac muscle cells have multiple nuclei. Smooth muscle doesn't. Skeletal muscle is the only muscle tissue controlled voluntarily, while cardiac and smooth muscle are involuntarily controlled. Skeletal muscle attaches to bone or skin and is responsible for its movement. Smooth muscle makes up hollow organs such as the stomach, bladder, and respiratory tubes. Cardiac tissue makes up the walls of the heart. Smooth muscle fibers are much less organized than those found in the skeletal and cardiac tissue. These are the major differences between these cells and can be used in correctly identifying them.